Hi, my name is Bill Burton. I'm here with Mark Segal in Philadelphia. The date is July 20th, and the office is in
Do you
Philadelphia.
need me to turn that off?
Yeah, that's what I was about to do.
Yeah, there's a remote over there. And you close the door also. Look on top of those copiers. You'll see and you can close the door also if you want. Keep the noise down.
In the office of in the Philadelphia Gay News. First of all, Mark, do I have your permission to interview and to
Absolutely.
use this interview for the LGBT History Project of Central Pennsylvania?
I am honored.
Okay, thanks. Mark, we're going to basically focus in on Governor Shapp and your involvement in what happened back in 1973 with the Governor's Council. I guess my first question is, why did you decide back in 1973 to write to Governor Shapp about LGBT rights?
Governor Shapp had a reputation for being a progressive. What we were doing was obviously out of the box. There were no rules. No one knew what to do. We knew that the next step in our progression was the political world. Up to that point, no governor anywhere in the nation had met with LGBT activists. If anything, if they saw a gay person coming towards them, they would have run the other way. Governor Shapp, on the other hand, when I wrote to him, I was shocked to receive a letter back stating he'd be glad to meet with us. And then later that same day, I got a phone call saying he's going to be in Norristown, and if I can make it to Norristown, he'll make the meeting that day.
Did he ever, in any other statement that he made, ever refer to LGBT people or rights, or just
No.
he was just a progressive?
Up to that point in American history, you will not find an elected official anywhere that had ever mentioned gay, lesbian, homosexual, homophile, what have you. You must remember what the condition of gay people was at that point in history. We were fighting to allow lawyers to pass the bar. If a doctor became known as a gay person, he might have not gotten his license, he wouldn't have gotten into a hospital. Governments would fire you. People had liquor license, might lose their liquor license if they served gay people. Things were not very good for us. We were just beginning to come out as a community and people getting to know us. But to that point, if you were gay, you were immoral to the religious society, you were illegal to the criminal justice system, you were to the medical industry, you were psychologically ill. We were the bottom rung of American society.
So, what did you think when you actually got the invitation? What did you personally feel?
The best example I can give you is when a dog hears a very strange sound, it usually just tilts his head. That's how I felt. It was like, wow, the man is actually going to meet with us. And then I thought, does he realize what this means? And then my third thought was basically, oh, it's in Norristown. He doesn't want anyone in the Harrisburg in the press corps to see this, so we're doing it in Norristown.
Did he give you an indication it was just going to be you and him and nobody else? No aides? No.
He knew I was bringing, his staff knew I was bringing Harry Langhorne, who worked with me on issues at that point. And Harry Langhorne at that point was president of the Gay Activist Alliance of Philadelphia. But he also was a member of my group, which was the official group that was meeting with Governor Shapp was the Gay Raiders, which I headed. And the Gay Raiders were very well known for disrupting TV shows. And that's how he got to know my name, which I learned in that first meeting.
Did he say no press? Did he say?
No conditions whatsoever, just if you can make it, we'll meet. And I assumed it was an out-of-the-way secret meeting.
So, what were your memories of that very first meeting? What was it like? What happened?
I can remember almost every bit of it today, like it happened today. We walked into the room, he had a big smile, put his hand out, shake my hand, and the first line he said to me, I think I saw you on the Cronkite Evening News.
Yeah, was that?
Yeah, and from that moment on, I knew this was a man who felt comfortable with us. And no politician at that point felt comfortable with LGBT people. And we talked for a while. He says, what could I do for you? And our first line was, there's a lot of discrimination going on in the state of Pennsylvania. Gay men and lesbian women are being discriminated against. And we hope you'll help us do something about it. And he says, well, how can I help? And I have this habit in my life to always going for the brass ring, the best thing, and figure I'll negotiate back later. And I said, well, you can issue executive order not allowing discrimination in state government. Or you can let us work with the various state departments and see how we can help make each of them help the gay and lesbian community. And he said, well, let's work on that.
Did he say he wasn't hesitant at all? He didn't say, I know there's going to be difficulties with that, or there's politics involved, or you don't understand, there's hills to climb on this.
He treated us as though we knew the political system and that we already knew it would be tough, and he was willing to fight the battle. I mean, the perfect example of it is, as I said, your question was it a private, off-the-record meeting? So I thought it was. After the meeting, he called his assistant, and his press assistant says, bring them in. They opened the doors, and the entire Pennsylvania press corps came into the room and photographed the governor and I. He decided he wanted it on the record. Those photographs are the first photographs of any governor in America meeting with gay activists. That was his decision, not ours. And that was in every newspaper in the state of Pennsylvania the following morning.
And what was the follow-up on that?
Follow-up was...
Fallout from those press...
Well, from that... At that point, I was probably the best known gay activist in America because I'd done all these TV disruptions. And along the way, therefore, you do every American talk show at the time. I'd done Phil Donahue at that point 2 times, and every other talk show you could think of in America. So I was getting headlines constantly, which was the goal of the Gay Raiders. Gay Raiders theory was to make us public, to do any stunt whatsoever to get us headlines, because there was incredible censorship towards the gay community at that point. Again, before 1969, newspapers didn't write about gay people. You didn't hear gay people or see gay people on TV. You didn't see us in movies unless we were committing suicide. You didn't hear us on talk radio stations. There was no discussion of us. We were censored, period. Gay Raiders decided to take us out of the dark, to take lessons I learned in Gay Liberation Front and say, we are in your face. And the concept of that is, if you bring us to light, people will begin to see that we're not the green-eyed monsters that they thought we were. They would discuss us, talk about us. It might not be polite at the beginning, but gee, the fact that we have gay people now as anchors on TV, the fact that we have lesbian people with TV shows on TV, and that the fact that we have gay marriage all comes from us being visible. That's what that campaign was all about. Right. Governor Schaap would have never taken that first step without those TV disruptions. He wouldn't have known about us. Right.
So, but after those, there were like no negative editorials.
Oh, yes.
Whatever after the governor in like the Harrisburg Press or Philadelphia Inquirer or Pittsburgh, there was no like, what is the governor doing? What does he think he's doing?
Yes, and if you Google it, yeah. If you go to the newspaper archives, you can find a lot of that. But the first reaction was just basic journalistic news items. Oh, the governor meets with homosexuals, and the word homosexuals was always used. But that
before LGBT.
Correct. And my line to the governor in those meetings were gay men and lesbian women. But the interesting aspect, for the most part, at the beginning, the articles the first day, and they were the first, were Governor Schaap meets with homosexuals. And the negative editorials didn't begin until the work began. So from the proposal that Harry and I wrote to the governor on how to create a governor's commission for sexual or minorities, which wasn't called that. That was the governor literally said that he wanted the word minorities in the title. That's how that came about, sexual minorities. he created members of his staff to work with us to create this council. But before he created the council, he issued the executive order, which stated that there couldn't be discrimination in state hiring. That created the first negative wave of some editorials in the paper. But it got even worse when the governor insisted on proving his point, because Colonel Barger of the state police barged in to the governor's office and started banging on his desk and said, "I will not have homosexual state troopers. I will not. I will not." And so the next evening, late into the evening, I got a call from Lieutenant Governor Ernie Klein that said, "Mark, we want you to sign up to become a state trooper."
I know, but let's wait. Hold on, because I want to come back to that.
That's where the first negative came out. Yeah.
So let's go back after the first meeting. You attended a task force of LGBT activists and agency representatives that held a series of meetings prior to the creation of the PA Council for Sexual Minorities. What were your memories about developing that task force to develop the thing?
Well, most of the
Who was on that task force of the activists? Do you remember?
God, I really can't remember all the people, to be honest with you. Various people came and went.
Were they from like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh?
For the most part, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. We had one guy I know from Harrisburg, and I can't remember his name, lived on Bow Street.
Is that Joe Burns?
Might be. Bill somebody or other rings a bell. But they came and went, members of the LGBT community. But it was very stable in state government who was there. At the first meeting, I remember most of the department heads or the deputy heads that came to that first meeting were like, you looked at them and you looked at their faces and you thought they were saying in their head, "Why am I here? What am I doing?" They didn't believe this was actually happening. And my reaction was, great, this is terrific. Even I didn't realize how extraordinary this was.
So, did you just decide, the governor says, okay, I'm ready to help you. Did you and the task force, did you like suddenly said, we're going to focus in on hiring, or what did you decide you're going to focus in on?
Well, the first meetings that we had were very small. It included Harry, myself, Terry Delmuth from the governor's office, and Barry Cohn, who is from the Attorney General's office, which was run by the governor's office. Those were the two pivotal people in the governor's office who...
They're straight?
Yes, well, Terry was, Barry later... At the time, Barry claimed to be heterosexual. He was married, had children, but... Well, it's very famous because he later came out as bisexual, and he and his wife, you might want to look this up, wrote a book called Barry and Alice, about Barry and Alice, which is his wife's name. And that became controversial, but that was years later.
Okay. So again, what did you decide to focus in on for the governor?
Well, the first public issue was non-discrimination. And how do we achieve that? And the governor wanted us to broaden it department by department and to see what we could do in each department. And we started, once we got a larger group and once it became the actual Commission on Sexual Minorities, each of us became chair of a committee which specifically dealt with an individual department. But that was when we became basically a bureaucracy.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So individual...
An unpaid bureaucracy.
Huh?
Well, those of us who were activists weren't paid for our service. Yeah.
So the individual departments would be like...
I dealt with the insurance department.
Of the state?
Yes. And I also dealt with the Department of Corrections. And on the side, the governor had me lobbying the legislature, which was kind of comical. Because the legislature, just like it is today, is not as liberal as maybe the governor is. And they were not happy with what the governor was doing. And we had lots of problems, some of which still haunt me to this day. I was called everything you could possibly imagine, every slur that there was, and this was on the floor of the legislature or the Senate. The people couldn't understand why the governor was doing this, and the blame primarily fell upon me because I'm the one who asked him to do it. It wasn't a very polite time. People, there are articles in the Harrisburg Press where characterizations of me were being passed around on the floor of the Senate and the legislature. Luckily, I didn't have time to concentrate on them, but now I realize the anger or the hurt of it.
Yeah. So you realize that the best you probably could get was really a non-discrimination agreement in all the state agencies, like
That was the
Corrections,
best we could do, yes.
Department of Revenue,
Yeah, and it
Department
took
of Motor Vehicles.
and it took various forms depending on who was running that department. For example, in insurance was, I believe, Sam Denenberg was the commissioner of, God, what a memory, of insurance, and I dealt directly with him, and he put out a statement himself that insurance companies cannot discriminate against gay men and lesbian women in any way, shape, or form. And that was revolutionary at that time, because at times, gay men or lesbian women, if they were out, which was few people, sometimes couldn't get life insurance. Amazing, isn't it? Sometimes couldn't get health insurance. And this is long before AIDS.
Yeah.
But there was an impression that they were more susceptible to STDs or whatever. So therefore, it was a problem. And Mr. Denenberg said, no longer. And this was sort of a surprise to all of us. This was something that we uncovered as we were going through this motion. We also discovered how trans people were being treated in correctional institutions. Again, early on in the 1970s, this is pioneering work that wasn't being done anywhere else in the country. Yeah. And it was, all being done out of Harrisburg.
So tell me what role at this point in the formation of those. What role did the Rural Gay Caucus play in these committees, or did they play a role later?
I think their role was much later. We in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, for the most part, had problems dealing with getting people in rural areas involved. Best examples of that, it really was difficult finding people from other than Philadelphia and Pittsburgh to be on the actual council when it was created. Right. One of the best examples, and I don't want to speak for rural Pennsylvania, that would be impolite of me. I would strongly suggest you speak to people in Harrisburg who now are doing an incredible job, and also speak to people like Sam Dietz, who is an incredible hero. He was organizing in a place called Northumberland, Pennsylvania, which I'd never heard of until he called me one day and said, hey, we want to organize in Northumberland.
So, well, we can come back to that. So, we kind of talked about the specific issues that the committee's been involved with, like insurance. And that was really interesting. Any other issues like the insurance thing?
That was one thing after shot, just that right there.
So let's go back to the state trooper issue. The state trooper job, when you applied to be a state trooper. Let's go back to that story that you touched on in the book.
Well, I was pretty well known for doing anything whatsoever to create media noise so that people would look into gay issues. And we were going along pretty easily with the issue until the governor issued his executive order, at which point the Colonel Barger barged into his office and said, I'm not going to have homosexual state troopers. That's the way I heard it. And the way I heard it was through Lieutenant Governor Ernie Klein, who called me that night and said, the governor is telling you he wants you to sign up to become a state trooper. And that was one of the weirdest requests I've ever received in my life. So he said, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., you'll show up at the Belmont Plateau offices of the state trooper. We'll be prepared for you. Just go in and sign up. And I said, but I don't want to be a state trooper. He says, don't worry. He says, the governor wants you to do it. Just do it. Those were the only directions I had. But as I think about it now, this is the governor doing what I would call a zap. And calling the bluff of his own colonel of his own state police. So the following morning, I showed up at the police barracks, and again, entire press pool. The governor's press office had called the press out to watch me sign up to become a state trooper. So as I'm going into the police barracks, a reporter stops me and said, "Mr. Segal, you're a homosexual, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Why do you want to be a state trooper?" And just flippantly, I said, "Because I like men in uniform." And everybody in the press pool laughed. Her name was Jessica Savage, by the way. And then I said, in all seriousness, if I can do the job, I should have the rights to sign up for the job. I have a right to make a salary. I'm a taxpayer. I also have the right to do any job that anybody else can do. And I then went in and signed up to become a state trooper, filled out the paperwork. They had waiting for me there, and I came out and took some victory photos and left. But what's unusual about that is I was wearing jeans. I had a shirt with a peace sign on it. My hair was down to my shoulders. This was street theater at its best, and the street theater was created by Governor Shapp, not by me.
So whatever happened to your application? Whatever happened after?
Strangely enough, I never heard a word on my application, but strangely enough, Colonel Boucher never, ever spoke of the subject ever again.
So I would take it not many homosexuals went down and applied.
Yes, they did.
Really?
yes.
They just didn't say they were homosexual.
The question was never asked. So I guess you might say it was first don't ask, don't tell.
Right. So,
But we do know the gay troopers did appear on the scene.
So that wasn't...
Just not me.
Yeah.
And I am very thankful of that.
Yes, I don't think I would apply. In your book, you talked about Tony Silvestri and Barry Cohn, and the governor, they were head of certain committees. And the government said, didn't want you on certain committees because of your image.
Didn't want me to be chairperson of the entire group. Yes.
So what was it about your image? And were you offended by that, or what were the committees, and what was your, did you take offense to that? Or?
Being the person who came up with being that was my baby, of course I was at the moment. I was hurt. But by that point, we were way into the process, and I realized, in hindsight today, the governor was absolutely correct. I was long-haired. I was a person fighting the establishment, and we were now going to work within bureaucracy. So it was my turn to take a back seat. And he was correct. I mean, in a sense, he personally talked to me about it. He told me before he did it, he did all the right moves. He was very polite about it. He said, "Mark, if you really want this to proceed, if you want it to be a success, you know that you're not the right person to head it." He said, "You came up with it. It's a great idea. We're moving on it, but don't want it to be a success." He was right. He was absolutely correct. Me dealing with bureaucracy at that time was sort of ridiculous. On the other hand, he had me, for some strange reason, he said, "Look, you'll have a couple committees, which you'll head, and you'll also work with trying to pass legislation in the Senate and the Senate and the legislature," which was kind of strange since I wouldn't work with the bureaucracy. I was now going to be lobbying with state representatives and senators. That was sort of a consolation prize, and one he knew would go nowhere, quite honestly. But he also was kind enough to say, now, you also have to start fitting in properly. If you're going to represent the governor and go and talk to state representatives and senators, you need to wear at least a blazer. I mean, you don't have to wear a full suit, but you have to have a blazer. I didn't own a blazer, so the governor went out and got me a blazer.
Right. You talked about it in the book. So that was,
Yeah. He is my political mentor. I think he literally is the first political ally this community anywhere in the nation has ever had.
right. He was the first.
Let me tell you how advanced he was. He's doing all this before the first congressional non-discrimination bill was ever introduced, and that was introduced by Bella Abzug and later Mayor Koch of New York. This is amazing.
And that was in the 80s.
No, 1974, May 1974.
In New York.
No, the congressional bill
Right.
in Congress, what we now call ENDA, or the Equality Act. It's been sitting there since May of 74. And what led from the governor's council to this day, we're just beginning to realize some of the outrageous arm span it had. Example, Governor Shapp ran for president in 1976, and because of his being status as an ally to our community, I signed up to run Gays for Shapp, which became the first LGBT presidential campaign. There had never been a Gays for any other political candidate, and he only ran in Florida. And I took Leonard Matlovich with me, and we campaigned for the governor. And there was a televised debate between him and another candidate running for president that year, a peanut farmer from Georgia by the name of Jimmy Carter. And moderating the debate in Florida for the primary was a man by the name of Walter Cronkite. And I was on stage, and before the cameras rolled, Cronkite saw me, came over, and we started talking. And he says, "Why is Shapp running for president? And by the way, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm helping to run part of this campaign." And I explained why. And he said, "He's doing all these things in Pennsylvania?" I said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, he's known for what he did for the independent truck drivers." I said, "That's correct. And he's also done as much for the gay and lesbian community." So when Governor Shapp was introduced that night by Walter Cronkite at the presidential primary, Walter Cronkite stated, "And Governor Milton Shapp, who helps to create a coalition of truck drivers and homosexuals to win this primary." But after that primary, when the cameras went off and Shapp went over to talk to Jimmy Carter, Jimmy Carter said, "What about that introduction you just did?" And Governor Shapp started talking to Jimmy Carter, the future president, about the work he was doing with the Governor's Council of Sexual Minorities and the executive orders he did. That led to Jimmy Carter appointing Midge Costanza to become the first liaison to the LGBT community nationally when he got into the White House. That led to the first meeting in the White House with LGBT leaders. People don't realize how Pennsylvania has been a vanguard of the gay rights movement since day one.
Yeah. And you could trace it back to that first phone call to and your letter to Governor Shapp.
What I just told you, I just recalled that whole thing this week when I was writing an article for LGBT media on how LGBT people have gotten involved in the political system from the 1970s to present day.
Right.
And that's just amazed me. Just 8 years ago, when I interviewed then Senator Barack Obama, I discovered that his deputy campaign manager, Steve Hildebrand, was a gay man. Think about that.
Yeah.
There's David Axelrod, there's Senator Obama, David Axelrod, and this guy by the name of Steve Hildebrand, deputy campaign manager. There's never been an out deputy campaign manager of a presidential race in the history of this country. It was 8 years ago. And so I said, "Steve, can I do an interview with you?" And Steve said, well, let me check. And so he asked David Axelrod and Senator Obama, and both of them said manager to ever be interviewed. Well, 8 years later, this year, Hillary Clinton, her campaign manager was a man by the name of Robbie Mook. He's an out gay man. The progression is of our struggle for equality is absolutely amazing, and I watch it in.
And our influence is growing too. So that's
I did my little bit.
I think a significant bit. You talked about your lobbying efforts.
It taught me a lot.
Did you take part in the lobby education day with legislature?
Oh, absolutely.
What about that? Talk a little bit about that.
I have a picture of me by the bus we rented to bring people from Philadelphia to Harrisburg. And I remember we opened the doors to that bus at whatever time in the morning it was. And I forget how many seats the bus had, but I think we had 15 people in the bus. That shows you, I mean, most of our community at that time wasn't willing to really go up and be identified as gay and talk to their legislature. It was a success because it was the first time it was ever done. Just doing it was successful. And that was primarily organized by the Royal Caucus, and by members of the Royal Caucus. Yeah, I think that was their idea more than it was Pittsburgh's or Philadelphia. And we primarily because we felt that we could get the votes in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia from the legislature, and it was the rural areas that would be difficult. Right. So we needed them to take the lead on that, and they did it very well.
So, what about the reactions from the opponents of the governor's initiatives? What about the?
Well, that's where the pain comes in. You had legislators and senators passing around cartoon figures of me and the governor, or me and somebody else. We were called every slur that could be called. Editorials were written in newspapers around the state. But basically, never, anywhere did the governor ever stop his advocacy, no matter what situation occurred. He was a brave man. Unbelievable. He's one of my heroes.
Talk about the first statewide gay conference in Harrisburg at the State Museum. What are your memories of that experience? When was that?
I believe it was after the council was created. My memories are not so great on it, to be very honest. It was chaotic, is all I can recall.
Who created that? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I'm sorry. I mean, it was covered by the press, so you could go back and take a look through archives.
What about
another person you should be talking to is Jason Goodman. He's a young gay activist. Very important. He's somebody who's really done research in the state archives. He's the one. About a year ago, I had totally forgotten about the paper I wrote to the governor asking for the advisory council and setting out how it should be run and what should be done. I didn't know it existed anymore. Jason Goodman found it.
Now where is it, Jason?
In the if you'll email me, I'll introduce you via email.
Okay.
Yeah, he's done considerable work on finding those papers and that information. And he gave me I have a Xerox copy of it now, which is something that amazes me.
What about the idea of the Gay Pride Week proclamation? How did that come about? And the reaction of the gay community to that first proclamation? The reaction of the legislature that
several of us sat down and tried to figure out what should be,
84, I think.
I believe, 85, if I'm correct. And I would show it to you, but unfortunately, I do have a copy of it, but I believe it's on view now at the State Museum in Harrisburg. I loaned it to them for this display they're doing on the 40th anniversary. But you can read it there. It's we sat down to try to write a document up, and we pieced it together.
This is like 15 years after Stonewall.
Well, no, it's yeah, it is 15 years at Stonewall.
So gay prides
And-
have been going on in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia.
Oh, yeah.
No gay pride week, no proclamation.
Right, but nothing stating, I hereby, Governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, do create gay pride. Governor Shapp.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, this is again another Governor Shapp initiative. But if you look over there, I can do this. Which one do I have? Not only did, now the Governor Shapps were special because they were the first, but we became so powerful as an LGBT political bloc in the state of Pennsylvania that after the governor left office, we were able to get his replacement, Governor Thornburgh, to issue the Republican, a gay pride proclamation. This is the actual one.
Now, is that one where his secretary slipped it in and he signed it not knowing?
You did your research, yes. Dr. Ethel Allen, Secretary of the Commonwealth. Now, this one was written by Ethel and myself. So I helped write this. And it was based on the Shapp original gay prides, but a little stronger. And yes, she did slip it in. I had warned her not to do that. I said she should let him know what he's doing, and if he refused, he refused. So this has special meaning to me, simply because one of the great things about that is what that showed me was that we were getting people in our own community who wanted to then be involved and get things done for their own community, because Ethel was a lesbian,
Yes.
a closet lesbian.
Yeah.
And this is her contribution to the LGBT community. And it's historical in the sense that this is the first Republican governor in the nation that ever signed a gay pride resolution.
So he couldn't rescind it after that.
Oh, no, he couldn't. And there was a debate. Again, when I did research for my book, one of the things I discovered was, so I was going through newspaper archives around the state. And at first, inside the governor's office, political pundits were saying that they wanted to rescind it. And unfortunately, what happened was there were more editorials around the state of Pennsylvania in support of it than not. So they decided not to do anything whatsoever. But a few months later, they fired Ethel Allen.
Yeah.
She knew that was going to happen. But that was her taking a bullet for her community. That was her way to finally contribute.
Yeah.
And she was so proud of that. I met with her the day after she was fired, and I think it was one of the happiest days in her life.
Huh. Good for her, though.
Yeah.
That's quite a legacy.
I expected we were going to have a lunch and she was going to be very depressed. Contrary.
So.
And that's one of the joys of what I've been able to do. The most hurtful statement in my book, and I didn't realize it when I wrote it, but when I read it now, it's painful. I talk about when we were doing some of the early activism, 99.9% of our community was in the closet, and they hated what we were doing, and they hated us. And when I wrote that, it didn't bother me, but when I read it, it really affects me, overwhelmingly. Yeah. Because when they were passing around those characterizations of me and the governor on the state floor in Harrisburg, when people read about it in our own community, they laughed at us.
They laughed at you?
Yeah, our own community. And when I think about that now, that's painful. It's painful now. I didn't have time for it to be painful then. It is what it is.
It's because they were still in the closet and they were afraid to.
Yeah, they were the line that any gay actors will tell you they heard, and we all heard the same exact line. You will ruin it for us. It is etched into my mind how many times I heard that. You will ruin it for us.
Because they're afraid to come out. They're afraid.
They're afraid our actions would force them out of the closet somehow, or they would be discovered, or whatever.
But I think it took a long time for the gay community to understand that you can't make the rest of the world understand that we're just like you until
Well, they
you
see us.
actually come out and they see us.
Right. We are, the old line, we are your brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, uncles, and aunts.
But it took all that change to happen, the AIDS crisis, the assault from the community, the religious community, and the conservative politics to make everything change. How long did the council last, and how long will you remember that, the entire duration? How long did it last?
It sort of fizzled out. I'm not sure when. It went through, it fizzled out by the time we got to the Casey administration. I believe it existed for like the first year and then fizzled out.
Of the what administration?
The Bob Casey Sr., Bob Casey Jr. is now senator of Pennsylvania, but Bob Casey Sr. Became governor after Thornburg. So you had Shapp, Thornburg, Casey.
So it lasted during Thornburg's administration.
Yes. And Bob Casey, when running for governor, did an interview with Philadelphia Gay News and stated in the interview, if he becomes governor, he will continue the council and continue to issue a gay pride resolution.
So how active was the council during Thornburg's administration? Was it?
At that point, I basically was not really tuned into it very much. If I was doing anything, it was minimal.
Yeah.
So my memory of it is, Tony Silvestri would know better. I believe Tony Silvestri was its chairperson till the end.
Okay.
I believe. I could be wrong on that.
All right. Yeah, we're going to interview Tony. So, I guess what was the most memorable experience that you had while working on the council? If you could look back on it now.
The two most important for me was when the governor issued the executive order and asked me to become a state trooper. I mean, how bizarre is that? And I guess dealing with Herb Denenberg, who was our insurance commissioner, another progressive guy who understood what gay people were going through and wanted to make change. He knew more about the issues than I did when we first met. And that was impressive. And I really appreciate the fact of who the governor brought into his administration. But the most surprising statement for me or event that ever took place was when the governor was leaving office. We had a personal moment. And I wanted to personally thank him for everything he had done and the change he'd made. And I created a list of cities and states that now were doing similarly what we were doing and to explain to him what he created nationally. And I read this off, whatever. And I said, Governor, why did you go through all of this and the pain and suffering that we went through during all this? And he looked at me and he laughed and said, Mark, you know what? I'm in the closet as well. And I looked at him very strangely, and he started laughing. And he said, my real name is Shapiro. In order to run politically in Pennsylvania, I had to change it to Shapp. I understand discrimination. I didn't know that. I mean, I'd gotten friendly with his family, and no one had ever told me that.
No, you didn't know, nobody knew he was Jewish? Or?
Well, they knew he was Jewish, but you could be Jewish, but don't push it on the public.
Yeah.
And I guess he said, and we could go back to me not being named chairperson of the commission. Don't push it on the public. Go easy. Although he really didn't. With gay issues, he was really out in your face.
Looking back, what do you think is kind of like the what is the most importance and significance of Governor Chapman's initiatives in advancing the cause of gay rights at state level and as a political figure on the national level?
We could state that Henry Gerber was the first gay activist in America. We could also state that Milton Chap was the first governor in America, or the first chief executive in America to take LGBT rights or equality serious and fight for them, stand up for them. He became the first LGBT elected official ally in the nation.
I think what's important is that I don't think the gay community really knows that.
They don't. When you see histories of the United States written up, Chap is a footnote. That is extremely unfair. And that's because of the bias of historians and media who basically based in New York and Washington, D.C. and don't do their research.
Right. I know that's the importance of your story about what happened here in Pennsylvania and what happened with Governor Chap and what happened with you. And
There are three pivotal stages of the gay rights struggle, and in each of them, Pennsylvania has played a major role. So the first role is showing ourselves publicly. Well, in Philadelphia, we had the Janus Society, we had Daughters of Bilitis, and then in 1964, a restaurant in Philadelphia refused to serve gay people if they were dressed extraordinarily. And that wasn't accepted very well by the gay community, since this was a restaurant in the heart of the gay community, and basically that was their business in the evening. So they literally held a sit-in and handed out flyers outside that restaurant. That was the first of its type in the nation. Never happened before. The first picketing ever in America took place 1965 through 69, every July 4th, here in Philadelphia, outside Independence Hall. The first time any LGBT community seriously worked with a government to change policies happened here in Pennsylvania with Milton Chap. Those are three monumental changes in the history of LGBT. And they all happened in Pennsylvania. Compton's in San Francisco came later. Stonewall came later.
and these all happened.
Gays in the military came later, but we had gays in the state troopers. Think about it. All those issues happened here in Pennsylvania first. Amazing.
It is. It's actually very phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, just connect the dots.
Yeah.
And those dots went all the way to the White House. Those dots went all the way to the equality bill that's now before the Senate and Congress. When Bella Abzug introduced it in May 1974 and couldn't figure out how to get the bill moving because she had just four sponsors, herself, Koch, and Congressman Burton from California, and I forget the fourth. She sent it to me and said, "What can I do on this thing? Why can't I get it moving?" And I looked at it and I said, "Bella, do you realize that all the sponsors are white?" And she said, Bella Abzug, "Get me a black member." And I said, "I'm not a member of Congress." So I thought for a while, and I realized that we had African-American Congress people here in Philadelphia. So I went to see my local congressman, and his name was Robert N.C. Nix. And I said, "Congressman, I'd like you to sign on to a bill that will stop discrimination against gay men and lesbian women." And he looked at me and said, "Why should I do that?" And luckily for me, I smiled and I said, "Because my grandmother, Fanny Weinstein, took me when I was 13 years old to march with you around City Hall for civil rights for the African American community. I'm now asking you to help my community." And Robert N.C. Nix became the first African American to sign on to the Equality Act. Now, what's important about that, Robert N.C. Nix was also one of the founders of the Congressional Black Caucus. Again, Pennsylvania coming to the rescue.
Let me ask one more question. Why do you think that Pennsylvania has yet to pass a statewide anti-discrimination law for gays?
Because as Jim Carville, political pundit, says so well, you have Philadelphia on one side of the state, you have Pittsburgh on the other, and in the middle you have Alabama. So the middle part of the state is a place that is rich with state representatives and state senators. And they're basically conservative and
Do you
Republican.
think we'll ever get it passed?
Yes, I do. But let me say something that is a little, I don't shy from controversy. So let me say it very clearly. There's one reason we don't have it on the books right now. And that's because we don't have a strong governor. Governor has power. The governor could say very simply, I will not sign the next budget of the state of Pennsylvania, and I will not let it become law until I have an equality bill. We are only one of 22 states that do not have an equality bill, and I won't allow it. Give me that legislation. What that says to me is we're not a high priority.
Right. So,
We will be eventually. I mean, it
it takes the right person.
takes the right leader. We are, as Obama said, Selma, Seneca Falls, Stonewall. What that sentence meant very simply was that our civil rights movement is as equal to any other civil rights. And therefore, we should look at how those civil rights movements have progressed. Perfect example. It was President Kennedy, but more importantly, President Johnson, who told the Senate, if you didn't pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act, no legislation would go across my desk.
Right.
When do we get a governor with that kind of leadership?
Right. So, I think you're right, Mark. All right, so,
By the way, I've never said that before.
Huh?
And I'm sure Wolf is not going to be happy
No.
with it.
well, I want to thank you, Mark.
Did I give you what you wanted?
You did, and more.
Okay.
So,
And I wanted to say
Go
some
on.
stuff I've not said before.
I think it's, we can go on. There's other
Yeah.
stuff, but this is.
But I didn't want to speak for rural Pennsylvania. That's not my right. They have their own voices. They've suffered more than we in cities. It's easier. It's sometimes easier for us in cities
So
to
we've
get
got
the.
people lined up to talk, so. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.